Welcome here to the evening discussion called 25 Years Living in Change, which takes place this time in Berlin in this experimental pavilion. The timing of our event is actually perfect because yesterday on the 9th of November, actually Germany celebrated the fall of the Berlin Wall. We are now on the 10th of November, so we are exactly at the right time, hopefully at the right place. Housing is currently widely discussed in Berlin nowadays, also with important initiatives such as the Wohnungsfrage exhibition at the Haus der Kulturen der Welt. I would like to here make a connection to that. At the Wohnungsfrage conference, the New York-based professor of architecture history and urban planning, Reinhold Martin, formulated a thesis about the neoliberal turn in the housing system after 1990, which resulted in what he called a commodification of housing. In other words, that housing has become major currency of on the global financial market, and this shift was accompanied by a retreat of the role of the state and the public housing programs. And according to Martin, these are the reasons for the housing crisis we are currently at. Also with Reinhold Martin, I found a nice definition of what housing actually is. Quote, what after all is housing? Surely, among other things, housing is an architectural type, a species of building that branches into a variety of subspecies and groupings, perimeter blocks, high-rises, low-rises, Siedlungen, planned unit developments, single-family houses, projects, gated enclaves, slums, favelas, barrios, squats, condominiums, cooperatives, and so on. Nonetheless, housing seems to be a very special building type that bears the burdens of society as a whole. In it appear all the antagonisms, the hopes, the failures and the contradictions of what we still call modernity. It is exactly this burden, this apparent proximity to history that confers upon housing its aura of specialization. Yeah, well, you know, we can basically also describe Martin's thesis as simplifying, paying too much attention to the economic values of housing on one hand. On the other hand, it's a very good instrument for us when we look at the last 25 years and the break, which was called by the system change of the 1990. And therefore, we feel it is important to discuss personal stories and the radical change of the housing systems that took place since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the resulting transformations of the housing system. And as well, we think it's important to take a look at the living utopias, such as the state-funded housing programs of the socialist countries, and also the citizen-led initiatives such as Baugruppen, co-ops, and the Miethäuser-Syndikat model, for example, that are based on a notion of commons and sharing that could become a possibility to counter the market-driven pressure centered around housing. And we also have the city administration here, and we feel it's also important to discuss how the municipal land and affordable housing policy programs can contribute to more livable and more equitable cities. Well, our evening we will continue in this experimental format of the film clips which will be screened as an inspiration for discussion. Tanja Scheffler, who's teaching at the TU Dresden, curated this selection of Czech and German films. Our guests are, again, important actors from both Berlin and Prague in politics, culture, and architecture. They're active in public sphere. After the film, as already Robert mentioned, we have the Berlin premiere of this documentary, which will be introduced by Maroš Krivý, architecture professor from Tallinn, who will be giving us the theoretical framework, as well as hopefully the producer of the film, Vernika Janátková, will join us later during the evening and will be also available for your questions. How do you remember your personal childhood, and what was the image of the housing estates in the 1970s and 1980s and today? And then also how to judge the propaganda films in comparison with the reality. We have here views from the eastern side and possibly also from the western side of the Berlin Wall. So that could be an interesting comparison.
So I have to start, yeah. When I remember being a child, most apartments wouldn't even have a bathroom. So propaganda films, I think, took up this question just to show people or make them have appetite on modern buildings and apartments. So a lot of things changed since then, yeah.
So you would say that the housing programs were actually successful in delivering basic needs, for this hygiene, lighting, parks, the four main objectives of the modernist housing, basically.
Yeah, I think so. At least they showed the way, and so reconstruction and restoring old buildings just moved after. The new buildings showed the way, and so the restoring the old ones just took the second step. So modernization was probably started by all these housing programs, I think. Yeah. So in a way, yes, successful. But well, if you see the examples like that, I think most is just more mass, more quantity than quality. So what probably was missing is that people were just being part of how a house should be constructed. And, most of it probably happened by letting the architects work, but they probably didn't, like one film showed, they didn't ask people what they really wanted to have. So, and that movement had to come in modern times now, just taking people into the construction process. So partly in modernization it was successful, but not completely.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bulkerova, what's your...
When I was a child, I was living in that block of that kind of estate in the 7th floor. It was a coal mining city, 80 kilometers from Prague. It was 7th floor, so definitely at the top of the building, and from one window, we had a look to the Czech Middle Mountains. This is a very beautiful part of the land. And the second window was directly to the mine. But I didn't mind, so I was a child. And so we lived in this apartment. And on the other hand, we had a cottage at the mountains. And that was the very different, those two houses. In one house you had heating whenever we wanted, hot water whenever we wanted. In the second house it was a very old, 200 years house with just a dry toilet and nothing more, like a very simple kitchen. When we are now talking about housing and when we look to those housing estates, I think when we are talking about Czech Republic, the people were very happy to move in. That was like a first grade living because of the heating, because of the standard of the bathroom, because they were not forced to buy coal anymore, because they could afford an opportunity to go anywhere they wanted, and when they got back, then there was very favorable conditions in the house. Yeah. So when we are not talking about challenges, we are talking about individual approach to the housing. We are talking about sustainable and use-oriented housing. But in the type of housing what we have seen, then the identity was not individual one. That was collective identity, and it was. Based on the Siam construct, which was in Le Corbusier books, and was just approved. And it was very important after the end of Second World War, because there was a lack of housing after the Second World War, especially in the west part of Europe. So they started to build massively those types of constructions. It was not that much a problem in Czech Republic because our cities were not touched. The centers of our cities were not touched by bombing that much. But it's a very hard problem, for example, in Rotterdam, where the whole center of the city was just bombed over. And now they are seeking for a soul of the city. And it's hard. Because it's really hard to seek about the soul of the city if this was not meant as this was a very functional part of the world. And if you come to Rotterdam, the most livable part of the city is just a couple of old houses which are very near to the old city center. And the place of the old city center, it's pretty wide. And they are now, they have a huge discussion now what to do with it. Yeah, and how to solve this problem, because what's missing is a kind of dignity, it's a kind of urban dignity of the city. So they are trying to change it somehow. But if you ask me about the standard of the housing, it was a very good standard. At the end of 80s, we had a flats in Prague, in Žižkov and Vinohrady, very near to the city center, with no bathroom. So. And there are another advantages. Those housing estates are low cost. Those housing estates are easy care, and they offer you the freedom because you're not so much fixed on that. Yeah, every flat is the same, so you can move into the bigger flat or small flat, and let's say that the identity of the flat is pretty similar. So it offers you a freedom. And that was also at the beginning of the Siam movement, to offer the people of tomorrow the freedom not to be scared whatever you have to buy to be a good member of the society. Yeah, so this was like to make the very huge group of people free. That was a very important part of the story, I think. So I was very happy in that kind of building. I can't imagine today. So, but as a child, I was very happy to live there and to see the mines under my window.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe I have a little bit similar story to add because my grandmother lived in Baroque palace right in the center of Prague. It was a great big room with nice wood heating and everything. And she was very happy that she can move out and go to this concrete, nice, warm flat. So I agree that that was big success of the new era when everyone can have nice, warm flat. And of course, later, my grandmother and her family understood that she maybe did not do the best thing because then they lived in this building site. Nothing was really done yet. Everything was very raw, and everywhere was the mud and everything. So then only they understood that the things are more complicated. And I think this is nice things about building, about the utopias, that I think with the housing is a little bit like happiness, that the people try to find the right solution. They think they want something, then they achieve it, and they understand they want actually something else, and they are always looking for the new model which make them happy. And I think it was very nice in this ballet that this concrete buildings were the symbol of happiness, and today we are trying to find another happiness, and probably we will never do.
Yes, my childhood was so different from what we saw in those clips. I grew up in Lower Saxony, which probably is the most boring of the states in Germany, with more pigs than human beings living there. Grew up in a little town with 15,000 inhabitants, and next to my parents' house there were fields and wood. So of course seeing this or seeing bigger apartments was something I also I also saw that way, but only when I was visiting family in Hamburg. So it was really something different, and I probably never saw those really collective big housing units that we saw here until my studies in Hamburg. And I always thought that those kind of buildings and those places would lack identity, just as you said. But now some experiences they make me rethink this, because we of course have lots of those places in Berlin too. One of those is Michelangelo-Straße in Prenzlauer Berg, which is not the Prenzlauer Berg we all have in our minds, but also housing like that. So lots of green spaces there, and of course we, the Senate Department and the district, we believe as we need more housing, as we need more apartments here in Berlin, it would be a good opportunity to make this place a bit more dense and to have more housing on those, in between the existent housing. And of course we said, well, good idea, and we hope the people that already live there would like it. And so we showed them those plans. It was in a church in Prenzlauer Berg. 1,000 people came, and of course not everyone was able to say something about it. 50 people were able to do that, and they did, and no one was really, they didn't want that. They were happy with those places that some of us who might not live there would call as places that don't have maybe not high quality or not that kind of identification that other places in the city have. But it's their homes, they like it, it's their places, and of course this is something one also has to respect.
Just a small technical remark. We did some research on that, and we had exactly the same results. So the people doesn't want to make those spaces more dense. They're against, because there are still some advantages. For example, that you don't see your neighbors, almost. Yeah, that the distance between the houses is so high that you don't see details in the windows of your neighbors, usually, which is very common in the city when you have the streets of 8, 10, 15, or even 20 meters.
Yeah. I mean, it's very surprising for me to hear all of these reactions, because what we learned like at school was that like this whole housing programs are more or less a failure. And also, like a couple of years ago, I talked to these architects, and they were like, "Yeah, I would tear all of these Plattensiedlungen, Siedlungen, I would tear them down because like it's so horrible." And there seems to be like a very significant shift in this in the well, maybe it could be due to the market pressure, or I don't know, but the society finds out that maybe there are like certain standards that were set, and that was a lot of money invested in those houses, and maybe that there are certain values that we could go back to. Sorry, Mr. Hummel? I can wrap up. If you want.
Also ich rede auf Deutsch, ich hab's mir herausbedungen. Ich will noch eine kurze Sicht aus Westberlin dazu ergänzen. Ich bin hier in der Innenstadt aufgewachsen und hier ist in den 70er Jahren bei der Wohnungsbauförderung, 60er, 70er Jahre, schon sehr viel öffentliches Geld in private Taschen umgeleitet worden. Hier haben Baufirmen, Bauträger damals super gut verdient. Es gab keine Partizipation von den Bewohnern, Bewohnerinnen der Stadt. Es wurde einfach über die Köpfe entschieden, auch von den öffentlichen Wohnungsbaugesellschaften damals, sodass sich eine starke Hausbesetzerbewegung entwickelt hat, wo ich dann auch in einem besetzten Haus gewohnt habe und die sich halt bewusst gegen diese private Gestaltung der Stadt gewendet haben. Und in der Zeit sind dann die ersten Modelle entstanden, wie mit Privateigentum anders umgegangen werden kann, dass Wohnungen nicht immer privat sein müssen, sondern dass halt auch ein gemeinschaftliches Eigentum geben kann, dass halt gemeinschaftlich Häuser bewirtschaftet werden können, um der Stadt was zurückzugeben, um sich selbst und der Nachbarschaft halt was Gutes zu tun. Und es waren halt die ersten Ansätze, wo dann Anfang der 80er Jahre langsam entstanden ist, dass auch die Bevölkerung mal gefragt wurde, was denn jetzt nun davon gehalten wird, was hier gemacht wird. Also wir hatten damals noch so einen SPD-Senat, der hier sehr betonköpfig agiert hat, und da war es halt wirklich, diese Stadt musste mit ziemlicher Kraft, Gewalt drauf gestoßen werden, dass hier was anderes auch gewünscht wird von den Bewohnern und Bewohnerinnen.
Yeah, Mr. I'll make just a short wrap up that Mr. Hummel was giving us this perspective from West Berlin. Or is it necessary to translate in English? No. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So that was actually a different perspective from West Berlin. I mean, how there were like a lot of protests around 1968 against these large housing estates.
Later,
81?
81. 80s, in the 80s and 90s.
In the 80s and 90s. So what were the reasons
Ja, die Begründung ist schon so, es gab Leerstand, es gab gleichzeitig eine große Wohnungsnot hier in der Stadt. Es war echt schwer, eine Wohnung zu bekommen gegen hohe Kosten, obwohl man gleichzeitig wusste, es stehen alle möglichen Häuser in der Straße leer. In Kreuzberg wurden lieber Autobahnen geplant, als dass da irgendwie die Wohnungen gebraucht wurden. Und es wurde halt abgerissen und am Stadtrand eventuell neu gebaut. Das waren Sachen, die die Leute hier nicht wollten. Also es gab viele Gründe, die dann zusammenkamen mit dieser Privatisierung oder mit der Unterstützung der privaten Immobilienwirtschaft, wo dermaßen viel öffentliche Gelder in deren Taschen geflossen sind, was damals die Begründung hatte, von wegen, ja, wir freuen uns, dass überhaupt jemand investiert in Berlin, aber davon waren so viele Gelder vom Staat, dass die Privaten hier sehr glücklich geworden sind und sehr viel Geld verdient haben an dieser Westberliner Sondersituation. In anderen Städten in Westdeutschland war es nicht ganz so, aber auch die Richtung war trotzdem sehr ähnlich gewesen.
I think it was a lot of speculation. The house owners didn't take the responsibility for their buildings, and they just let them empty, and others looked for apartments and didn't have living space, so they said, let's take the houses and just move in. And of course a lot of clashes followed, and so Berlin society was very in move in that times, yeah. And I think it was a movement really bottom up, just to change things. And as to my opinion, well, it changed the picture of Berlin.
Yeah, you can see this Stille Straße. There is like a group of older people, rentners, who are currently occupying their place or a community room. You can see it in the exhibition in Haus der Kulturen der Welt as well. Yeah, so there is like this tradition of occupying urban space in Berlin, I would say.
Maybe it's slightly different Czech Republic or even Prague and Berlin, because we don't have empty estates, and also there is a difference if you make those Plattensiedlungen on the place of older buildings, which happened also in Czech Republic sometimes, or if you make it on a like free space, a green land, because there is a city called Most, which was totally demolished. That was like 800-old city. It was totally demolished because of coal mines. So they demolished the whole city. They transferred the church of 800 meters. They just put it on the rails and they transferred for 800 meters. And after that, they put the coal off, and they have built on about the same place the modernistic city of Most. So that's one example. But what happened in Prague is that the city was increasing and increasing step by step, and what was taken was just the green land. And then there is a difference, and also maybe sometimes there is a difference in the architectural quality of different estates or Plattensiedlungen, because we do have in Czech Republic, and I imagine that's the same in Germany, that you have those of them, and they are made with a very big architectural quality, and then there's maybe some of them which are just put it somewhere because there was a lack of flats. Yeah, and it's a difference if you live. If we are speaking about identity, there is a difference between Siemensstadt and some of the new constructions which were built just because that amount of flats was needed.
We have heard here like a number of critical points to this Plattensiedlungen or Siedlichte, being monotony, the lack of human proportions, the children solved it with some kind of a surreal, spontaneous installation landscape of like found objects. Yeah. On the other hand, just before then, you told me it's supposed to be a success story of housing. I mean, maybe you can react to these some of the points, for example, like monotony or lack of identity. We had that already a little bit. Yeah. So, if you would like to react, Karolina.
I just recently wrote an article on the biggest Prague Plattensiedlung, which is almost of the size of Marzahn, and it's and there was very visible the shift we were mentioning. Really, in the beginning, the people have to deal with the problems, especially practical problems like lack of I don't know, services, lack of schools, but nowadays it's really different, and there is quite nice research in Prague. They were about this particular Plattensiedlung that they were measuring how far the people have to go to reach something, and I think about 90% of the people have the public transport within 5 minutes, school within 10 minutes, and healthcare. Everything is very well now organized. And you also see some mental shift, because the people who disliked the Plattensiedlung, they moved out already, and now only the people stay who enjoy or who appreciate, who like to live there. So you really hear mostly positive things about the living in these areas. Also, there is another research about how the people are satisfied with their or happy with their housing. And in 2001, they were asked what they which material they liked, and no one liked concrete. But there was another research in 2011, and nowadays the people somehow. The difference is not big, and the people are as happy in bricks as in concrete houses. And the explanation to it is also that the conditions in the Plattensiedlung have improved, and also that the houses and their surrounding got nicer, got improved. So people are actually now quite happy there. And I have one remark to this Ubanzo film. For us it was, or for me, this was a book and the film which really explained the worst side of West. And when I was many years later going to Ubanzo station, I was almost scared. I thought really it was an evil place. So I would really like to hear some explanation from someone who lived there, or who have some experience with this site. Was it really as evil as we thought?
Yeah, maybe I share this evil thing because it was presented as the worst thing you can see on the West. So it's a zoo station, and it was compulsory to read the book at school. So we were forced to read the book, and I don't know if we have seen the film. I think we've read the book at school. But just a small remark to at the beginning, to live at the Plattenbausiedlung in Prague, in those surroundings, that was kind of adventure. Yeah, because it was really unfinished. Sometimes there were also people sleeping in those unfinished houses because they did an extra shift during the weekends to be able to finish it. But I have some friends, and they are remaining the times of their childhood, and they are saying, look, those unfinished spaces, they were much better playgrounds than the sophisticated we go to with our child today. Yeah. So those unfinished spaces, they give us such great space for our fantasy. But like the Plattensiedlungen of today, they are not those adventurous spaces anymore. But right is that sometimes they've built the housing, but not the services. So we had schools in Prague and in other cities as well, and they made 2 shifts in schools. So half of the children, they went to school from 8 to 12, and the second half they went there from 12 to 4 o'clock. Yeah, so there was like very strange. You can't believe it almost today, but it was so. So sometimes they made the flats, but not the rest of the services, not even the schools or the kindergartens. So it was very, it was like an avant-garde to live there sometimes.
Yeah, Mr. Hummel, maybe you can react to the Bahnhof Zoo question.
Genau, zum Bahnhof Zoo. Also ich würde sagen, am Zoo waren es wirklich nur sehr wenige Ecken, die so schlecht waren. Der Film macht eine kleine Stelle, macht die sehr groß. Es gibt dann eher die Kurfürstenstraße, wo das Sound war, als Beispiel. Das war eine ziemlich schlechte Straße, Kurfürstenstraße, Potsdamer Straße, Kriminalität, Prostitution, Frauenhandel, der da an der Stelle stattgefunden hat. Das war schon ein richtiges Problem. Und das andere, was der Film natürlich sagt, die Gropiusstadt, die war natürlich stinklangweilig, genauso wie jedes Plattenviertel in den ersten 5 Jahren nach Fertigstellung. Es gibt keine Bäume, es gibt noch die ersten Spielplätze, es gibt noch eine Baustelle außenrum. Das ist einfach langweilig für viele Leute. Und da haben wir einfach das gleiche Problem, wie man es dann, wie ich es 1989 dann in Hellersdorf gesehen habe, was auch gerade fertiggestellt wurde, wo es dann noch langweilig war, wo ich aber heute sagen würde, die Leute wohnen da ganz gerne und es ist in Gropiusstadt auch. Aber jedenfalls Bahnhof Zoo ist eher so ein bisschen ein Sonderfall.
Okay.
Noch eine Sache mit den Platten. Hier in Berlin lieben wir ja alle diese Altbauviertel zwischen Schöneberg und Prenzlauer Berg und Kreuzberg. Diese Häuser, diese Viertel waren ja jahrzehntelang der Inbegriff von den schlechtesten Bauweise, die es überhaupt gibt. Es ist eine hochindustrielle Bauweise, strunzblöde. Also mein Urgroßvater ist zum Beispiel im Kreuzberger Hinterhof an TBC gestorben, da war nicht der Einzige gewesen. Das war einfach hier völlig normal und es war bis mindestens in die 60er Jahre hinein, 50er, 60er Jahre hinein, waren es total beschissene, schlechte Bauten. Und da wurde genauso geredet wie nachträglich dann halt über die Plattenbauviertel heute. Also man darf nicht vergessen, es gibt nicht die guten sozialen Bauten, sondern also das wurde halt in den 20er Jahren probiert, in Bausiedlungen, was die Gewerkschaften, was die Genossenschaften damals hergestellt haben. Da wurde halt eher probiert, was für die Leute zu machen, die anderen Gebäude, sowohl im Westen die Gropiusstadt als auch eben 100 Jahre vorher die Altbauten wurden einfach als Spekulationsgründe in Massen hochgezogen und waren für die Leute, die da drin gewohnt haben, ziemlich schlecht.
Okay. Yeah. Well, now it seems that like all of the hipsters should move to the Plattenbausiedlungen. No.
I'm waiting for the time.
Yeah. No, but what about this division of like work and housing? That's also an argument that it's so boring because you can't work here. Everything is so far. I mean, there is no place to go. It's too far to go to work. Yeah.
You mean in the historical context to talk about that?
What do you mean?
Would you like us to talk about that in the
Yeah,
historical
I mean,
context?
it's well,
changed,
no,
or?
it's like a major topic for urban planning. This division of work and leisure and yeah, what else? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's getting better and better because we do have internet, so the connections are now closer, and I think that what was planned after the Second World War was that the people will live outside the city, and that the functional zones will be really divided. So there will be a zone with like schools, offices, and so near the center, and then there will be a zone for recreation, then there will be a zone for housing. And let's say that that was based on the experience from the end of 19th century, where the cities were really, there was a lot of problems we maybe couldn't imagine anymore today. Yeah, the city were very dirty with a lot of problems, problems with no bathrooms, very poor canalization systems, and so on. So a lot of that kind of problems. So the Siam movement, it's a kind of reaction on that sort of problems of a 19th century. And now I think it depends on, there are different people. So someone likes to live on Plattenbausiedlung because it's easy. But I should make one remark that those flats are in Czech Republic private. Yeah, so it came to privatization, and we almost don't have flats in those parts of the city which are not private. So, yeah, so those flats were basically sold to the people. There are some groups or like I don't know how to call it in English, like a group of owners. Yeah, usually it's a group of owners, and so all the flats are privatized, and that's a big difference. If we are speaking about what are the differences between what you can see here and what's in Czech Republic, so the people are basically they are also happy to live there because the flats are theirs. That was a part of the research. So they are happy to have their own place, and they can buy it, they can sell it. So they have some place which can be defined as theirs.
Yeah, and I think this I'm really happy you said it, because I think it's a kind of very provocative thing, because first it's against the all ideals, collective ideals, which with which the Plattenbausiedlungen were built. And I also think it sounds quite provocative here, because I think that here in Berlin the usual idea is that actually the equal and good housing is not based on ownership. So I think I would be it's very interested to me what I myself also don't know what to think about it. But if you look at the Prague Plattensiedlung, you see that since the flats have been privatized, the conditions improved. So I'm really quite interested what you think about it from the Berlin perspective.
Yeah, that's true. Like there is a lot of discussion about ownership in Berlin. And yeah, maybe.
I think we have to explain that we had some talk before we started this discussion here between the differences of our two countries, and like we two played for more social housing and more idealistic constructions and so on, and you are more on private ownership. I think it's. Yeah,
it's very interesting,
but
which one is actually the
I think
better
it's no. I don't think it's only a question of what's better and what's worse, but like the same. If we have a look on the Plattenbausiedlungen, I think it's you have to. I try to look on it on a historical basis, and even in Germany, it's different if you. Grew up in the West or in the East, and then it changed, and it's a question of how you grew up. Like when I was a child, I lived in a small industrial town in the Ruhrgebiet, like coal mining, and I was used to it, and I was happy there as a child. And then my parents went to Bavaria in a very small village with cows and green and forest, and I hated it, yeah, because I didn't find a place to play. It was just the wrong surrounding. So what are you used to? And Plattenbau in the West was just low income, bad image, so nobody wanted to go there. So then it changed. People got used to that way of living and that way of building, and now after modernizing it, like for many senior inhabitants, it's just nice to live in there because you have barrier-free flats, and if public traffic is good, it's just the quality. So I think over the last centuries, a lot of things changed. Like you said, the old buildings are no longer what they used to be. So I think it's a completely different picture between your country and ours. So and same with the ownership. You just start at a different point, so it brings you to a different aim.
Well, let's talk a little bit now about the contemporary Berlin housing utopias. Mr. Hummel was maybe now it's the right point to explain the principle or the model of the Syndikat, and also say a couple of words about the largest WG in Berlin.
Ja, vielen Dank, dass ich hier anfangen darf mit den neuen Entwicklungen. Ich hatte ja vorhin mal kurz erzählt beim Vorgespräch, wir haben 100 Häuser in Deutschland, 16 davon in Berlin, 16 Miethäuser, also sind noch relativ klein, wachsen aber stark. Das Mietshäuser-Syndikat ist ein Netzwerk selbstverwalteter Wohnprojekte, Mietshäuser, deren zentrales Ziel ist, dass die Häuser nicht weiterverkauft werden können, um zu vermeiden, dass halt durch Weiterverkäufe, durch Renditeabführung an irgendjemanden, dass die Mieten unnötig steigen. Die Häuser sind selbstverwaltet und bleiben dauerhaft im Besitz der Bewohnerinnen und Bewohner, aber die Leute haben nur Mietverträge und können halt nichts mitnehmen, wenn sie ausziehen. Und so haben wir über die Jahre halt Häuser entwickelt, die inzwischen bezahlbare Mieten haben, am Anfang immer etwas anstrengend, aber wenn das Haus dann erstmal was geworden ist, dann ist es halt eine bezahlbare Miete. Das Beispiel, was Frau Dudova gerade erzählt hat, das ist die Malmöer Straße 29, ein Haus, was wir neu gebaut haben in Prenzlauer Berg, zu günstigen Baukosten, eben eine sehr angepasste Bauweise an die Leute, aber eben trotz all dem ein normaler Standard. Da wohnen 20 Menschen drin und 2 Kinder oder 4 Kinder, also ein paar Kinder jedenfalls noch. Und stand in meiner Zeitung drin, die größte Wohngemeinschaft Berlins, was ich eigentlich bezweifeln mag, ich kenne auch größere. Die aber mit einer Küche gemeinsam wohnen. Und das andere Kennzeichen aus dem Artikel war ja der Zimmersozialismus. Die haben halt 20 gleiche Räume, damit es einfach keine Unterschiede gibt, alle zur selben Richtung ausgerichtet. Aber es war genauso die Entscheidung der Leute, gleiche Räume zu haben, keine großen Luxusräume, sondern große Gemeinschaftsräume für sich gemeinsam und auch für die Nachbarschaft als Angebot und auch zusätzlich noch ein Solidaritätszimmer oder eine kleine Solidaritätswohnung, die halt umsonst zur Verfügung gestellt wird für normalerweise papierlose Leute, die halt zurzeit keine Aufenthaltsberechtigung hier in Deutschland haben. Dieses Haus fängt mit 5,90 € netto Kaltmiete an und das ist eben möglich über keine Rendite, günstige Baukosten, wenig Eigeninitiative, muss man auch sagen, also jetzt nicht so, dass da das Haus selbst gebaut worden wäre, sondern es ist halt wirklich von Baufirmen, ist aber durch die Bauform etwas begünstigt und konnte deswegen recht günstig gebaut werden.
Yeah, okay. Well, and does it work? I mean, you Yeah.
Es funktioniert sehr gut. Also das Ding ist 2012 fertiggestellt worden. Die Leute sind sehr glücklich da drin zu wohnen. Einzige kleine Problem ist, kein Mensch hat Lust, in Prenzlauer Berg zu wohnen. So ein spießiger Bezirk von Senioren. Da will man nicht mehr wohnen als junge Leute. Alle wollen nach Neukölln oder Kreuzberg. Insofern ist es echt schwierig, da Leute zu finden, die da freiwillig hinziehen. Und das andere Problem ist, dass sie halt eigentlich keinen Neubau wollten und alles probieren, dass das Haus aussieht wie ein Altbau. Immer so ein bisschen Plakate ranhängen und ansprühen. Aber das ist halt deren Entscheidung. Da mischen sich die Architekten oder das Syndikat auch nicht mehr ein.
And what was the process? I mean, was it like a participatory process with the entire group, or?
Dieses Haus ist auch so entstanden wie viele andere Häuser von dem Syndikat. Bei uns findet sich im Allgemeinen eine Gruppe, die gerne zusammenwohnen möchte und sich dann überlegt, wie kann sie das umsetzen. In dem Fall hatten wir den Kontakt zu dem Grundstück gehabt und die konnten sich halt vorstellen, das Haus neu zu bauen. Es gibt nicht die freie Auswahl nach Grundstücken oder Häusern in Berlin, heute erst recht nicht mehr, aber auch schon vor ein paar Jahren nicht mehr. Und deswegen haben sie das Prenzlauer Berger Grundstück genommen. Aber sie haben halt gemeinsam alles entschieden. Bei uns ist ja die Bewohnerinnen und Bewohner sind halt die Entscheider im Haus, die sagen, was gebaut werden soll, wer mit ihnen zusammen wohnt. Und müssen allerdings auch für die Finanzierung sorgen, müssen das Geld ran schaffen, was dann über die Miete abgezahlt wird, wo in der Miete einfach nur die Kosten drin sind, die halt in jedem Jahr, in jedem Monat regelmäßig gebraucht werden. Aber jedenfalls ein sehr schöner partizipatorischer Prozess, der sehr abschreckend für die Architekten ist, weil wir bestimmt 80 Treffen gehabt haben mit denen war sehr viel Aufwand, aber wir sind sehr froh, dass es halt so dahin gelaufen ist, weil sie inzwischen im Laufe des Prozesses auch sehr viel über Architektur gelernt haben, über Raumkonzepte, über Ideen und nicht als erstes über die Fliesen geredet haben, welche Fliesenfarbe im Bad ist, sondern dass halt erst mal ganz lange über Konzepte geredet wurde und dann entschieden wurde aus den Konzepten, wie das Haus gebaut wird, und es war eine sehr gemeinsame Entscheidung.
And Mr. Novi, so like your foundation is, for example, supporting such initiatives or such projects, or is it a different type?
No, it's different from the construction. Our foundation tries to be owner of the land, of the building site, and then make land lease contracts to the groups, and they organize in what legal form they like, and we ensure that with the land lease contract, we ensure that the house is really used for the purpose the people wanted to initially. Like if it's for artists or living with children or living for elder people, we just have a look on it. It will stay in that context, and if this is no longer possible, we would at least have a discussion. So, and we try to take land out of the speculation, and I think that's a different too. If you're in Germany, if you have very expensive building sites, it's very expensive to have an apartment and pay rent. So what we try is to really get the ownership on the land, just to enable people who don't have that much money to have a decent price for their apartment. If prices of houses are quite low, you don't have the problem at all. And I think, to put it bluntly, in Germany, capitalism has a very ugly face in some big cities, and we just try to put something against it, and that might be the difference. And I think it's once again a question of historical context as well. So we just work in a different situation, so we find different ways, and yeah.
Now I would address a question on Mr. Moschke. If the Senate is thinking about supporting in any way like this citizen bottom-up initiated, through like this land lease, or what's the current state of art?
Well, we support any kind of housing because we need more housing. but it's true that we cannot hand over municipal land to Mr. Hummel or Mr. Novihui. That's just simply not allowed because of the EU laws and Brussels. But still, we, Mr. Hummel and me, we saw each other several times now, and of course it's an interesting concept they have, and we are trying to find, in regard of certain spots here in the city, trying to find solutions so that innovative concepts like that can also be realized here in support of the Senate. But of course it is not easy, especially the question of land. All we can do with the land when we hand it over directly is to give it to one of the 6 city-owned housing companies. This is what, of course, we prefer to do. This is what we are allowed to do in order to make sure that there is affordable housing, because there we have the possibilities to make sure that there is affordable housing, and we have the instrument of the urban development contract to make sure that not only city-owned companies build affordable housing, but in the end, anyone who builds new apartments, if a Bebauungsplan is needed, then we have the possibility to make an urban development contract and make sure that 25% of the new apartments is social housing. That's pretty much it.
Yes. Well, have you?
It was very interesting what we have heard. It's not imaginable in the conditions of Prague and even in the conditions of another Czech cities. But as you said, the context is very special because it came to a huge expropriation after the end of Second World War in 1948. Was the main point of the expropriation. So after the Velvet Revolution, there was let's say 80% of the flats, and they were in very derelict state, and technically, and also there was no care for the most of the flats in Prague. There was almost no care for 50 years. So from the end of the war, there was no care. So the cities were facing a very strange situation. They had the flats, but they were not able to repair it. Yeah. So they started to privatize the flats in case to be that the people can repair it themselves. Yeah. So that was just for you to know what was the basic state of the situation. And so in Prague 7, we are now facing the situation. We do have like at about 4%. We are owning at about 4% of the flats in Prague 7, and we are under the pressure of the people living in those flats that we should sold also those 4% of the flats. Yeah. So the pressure to privatize also the rest of the flats, which is owned by the city, it's really high. But we couldn't do it because we have to have some amount of flats to be able to do social politics. Yeah, without it, we would not be able to do it. So the only buildings which are built by the city are mainly the buildings for older people, or the schools, or the kindergartens, or that kind of social services buildings, but not the flats. So for us, it's really strange to imagine that you've said that you will build like 40,000 of flats, and it's a kind of nice project, but not imaginable for Prague, yeah, for the moment.
Like, you mean there is not enough money in the budget, or Yeah, because you said 4%, and it's quite low, you know, just to make sure that there is enough affordable housing in Prague.
Yeah, so Prague 7 is it's very near to the center, but we do have maybe the biggest brownfield in the center of Prague because there is the old railway station, 80 hectares of let's say free land, and we are now facing a huge gentrification of the space. We have no Plattenbauten. So that's just from the half of 18th century, 19th century up to I don't know 30s, 40s, and 20th century usually. Some buildings from 50s, and that's all. And we are facing a huge pressure of gentrification, and we do have only 4% of the total amount of flats, but we don't have the money for the moment, and maybe much more important, we don't have land.
Are you a growing city? Is population?
Yeah, the population is growing constantly, so also the baby boom doesn't stop in Prague 7. It stopped somewhere in Prague, but we do have a huge amount of families with 3 children, which is an advantage for us. But we have to build every year plus let's say 40-50 places in a kindergarten every year. So we have a demographic study which says that we will be forced to do it in the next 5 years, and this brownfield is closed for the moment for building. So when it opens, so we would have this additionally 80 hectares of the land, yeah, and it's unfortunately this land was sold by the state owned company to private investors. So a couple of years ago, without any planning restrictions, only the master plan is there. But let's say the scale of the master plan is not enough to secure the development of the space. So it's a really hard for us now to think about or to discuss with the owners of the land what will be the next step.
This is the evil face of capitalism. The capitalism has evil face in Prague too. This is a good example, I think.
Yeah, well, there is like more large plots of land, also Smíchov in Prague. There's like another 50 hectares that were sold also without any restrictions. Yeah, you say Bubny, it's 80 hectares. I mean, the Prague land has been sold very unconsciously, and yeah, and now, yeah, now we have difficulties.
That's the point for us. If you don't own the land, you just have no way to take influence on the development of the city, and that what we are complaining in Germany as well, because we do understand the Berlin state because they don't have money, so they sell their land just to get money and pay their debts. But I think that doesn't open the future, because and you see it in your city. Like in our opinion, land shouldn't be sold to privates at all, but should be really in that question. I'm a Marxist, because that people should be owned by the state, because otherwise you can't have influence on the society, and like what you said, you have a certain need, but you can't fulfill it because you don't have the power, and land is power, and if you give it to the privates, you have lost. My opinion.
It was unfortunately not the city who was the owner of the land. It was the Czech Railway company, which is owned by the state, but there's no connection between the Czech Railways and the city of Prague. If it would be a city of Prague, I would say that would not come to these conditions. But usually we had large brownfields railway brownfields, and unfortunately this land was owned by a Czech railway company, and there was no any high intention, no pressure from the state or even from the city that there should be some regulatory plan or something like that before the land will be sold.
Of course, I need to answer Mr. Novihui because I wouldn't go as far as he did, but of course you are right. Berlin sold lots of land, and in the past, and it's still a bit in the present, the price was the major factor, the major aspect here. But we are trying to reorganize our whole land politics or policy, also trying to find ways that urban development is more important, so that of course the price still is a factor and will be a factor, but we will make definitions on what an investor will have to do in regard of urban development of the site and the surrounding of the site, so that the concept will play a bigger part. Of course, we cannot do this for each and every piece of land that will be sold in the future, but we are trying to do it for the big sites, big construction sites that are, in our point of view, of huge importance for the future of the city, the district, the neighborhoods. So there is a change coming. Also with new heads, there was a bit of a change. We had a political change here, some politicians that are not in charge anymore, and you are in charge. So this really has changed, and I'm quite optimistic that we will make more improvement here. Not in a Marxistic way, but still improvement.
Yeah. Well, thank you. At this point, I would maybe ask Maroš Krivý to give us a short response on the debate, how he sees it from his theoretical or perspective of an architecture historian, theoretician, and expert on urban planning. You can come up front if you want.
I can stand. Okay, thanks. So I think we are like half an hour over time, and people would like maybe to take some wine. So I'll try to be very quick. Maybe just highlight 2 points that have been mentioned during the debate. And one is the kind of change in the perception of collective housing that we have been observing during the last, let's say, decade, and especially after the housing crisis of 2008. So I think this change in the perception of housing estates or Plattenbau should be connected to the housing and financial crisis of 2008. So I think there is certain correlation. But the question is, what does this change in of perception mean socially, politically, and architecturally? And so you started with discussing the question of memory, and like how people remember the housing estate and so on. So I've been recently doing some research into housing estates in Czechoslovakia, and what I found was just by looking on internet, trying to find some old photographs, was that there is almost every single housing estate has its own Facebook web sort of Facebook group, where people are putting like old photographs and so on, and there are these debates like, hey, I found this photo, can you help me to identify which street it is, and so on. So that's funny, but also interesting. And this also kind of like maybe more general question would be, but like, what does it actually mean? The fact that we could even say that the housing estates are becoming interesting. I mean, they are like subject of different exhibitions. People do research about it. Books are published. even like Venice Biennale pavilions are made about like Czechoslovak pavilion in Venice was about housing estates and so on and so on. So what does it mean? And I think this is the main challenge, because like if we start to value these places then, so I think there are two options where it can lead to, and one is that we will simply let it will just become, let's say, an object of new gentrification, of heritage preservation and so on, which would actually mean a commodification or a certain commodification of Plattenbau. And on the contrary, what I think would be the more progressive or kind of step forward would be that what we kind of recover from the history of the housing estates would be not the form or not the architecture itself, but the kind of social impulse to think housing outside of private market. Yeah. So on one side, commodification of Plattenbau of housing estates or Sídliště, but on the other side, decommodification of housing. Yeah? So that's kind of my point here. And the second very quick one is then of course related to the debate about the property ownership, and then the kind of very different situation maybe not very different, but different situation between Prague and Berlin. And just I wanted to respond. I don't remember exactly who mentioned this, that people bought apartments are happy and the housing estates look better. So I think that's true. But what has to be said is that it's a structural problem, because now all these houses are in the private ownership, and that's why there is very low number of social housing or different forms of housing. So if in 1970s or 1980s people pay 4% of their income for rent, now they pay 40% or 60% even. So it's a structural problem, which always happened with these so-called rights to buy policies, like it happened in UK with Margaret Thatcher. Yeah. So the sitting tenants who live in the council housing. So yes, they profit, but what about their children, or what about the next generation? So I think that's the and of course the question of land ownership. I think that's essential. But I mean, I don't want to repeat what you said, because you were. So yeah, I will stop here, because and then you asked me also to make an introduction to the movie, and actually some of the themes. So I don't want to repeat myself, so I will say something more then. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. And now I would like to ask if there are some quick questions from the audience. Otherwise, we would invite you to drinks and small refreshments, and we would come back for the projection of the movie Concrete Stories.